Welcome to Accounting Life with Jotham Ty. Our guest today is Wendy Mazzoni, partner of digital solutions at Connor Group. In this episode, Wendy shares how her journey from public accounting to consulting leadership has been guided by curiosity, connection, and a people-first approach to digital transformation. Now, our host, Jotham Ty.
Welcome to the Accounting Live podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Jotham?
Doing very well, especially because we get to talk about one of my favorite topics out there. And you may know this abbreviation or letters by ERP. That might mean something to a lot of us here in the accounting space. So excited to have that conversation with you.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you having me here, and I'm excited. Yeah, enterprise resource planning. I think the ERPs do so much more and are so much more critical these days. So many more options. So looking forward to it.
I want to dig into your perspectives and best practices that you've learned over your years as it relates to ERP, and maybe to kick things off. As companies and organizations go with a process for selecting an ERP system, like what are the most critical steps in determining, like before you select an ERP, what kind of ERP to go with?
Yeah. So I think kind of starting, the one thing I got to say, thinking about recommendations and how to get started is start early, right? Really start talking to system implementation teams, right? Or, at Connor Group, we like to think of ourselves and what we perform a lot of times is a digital transformation. Right. So really think about, what do you want to get, not just from the ERP, but long term, what are the business changes that you want to do? And so how do you get started is really a matter of start talking to people, right? Start planning. I recommend, and I don't know if this is controversial or not, or if you'll think so, start talking to those system implementers well before you even talk to the vendors. And I think we all know vendors are trying to win your business, right? And they're going to show you demos of scenarios that may or may not make sense for you, like if you want to, limit customization, et cetera. So, everything starts with a plan. And I think of the best decisions in life, you really want to make sure you get a great perspective. And so talk to the experts.
Yeah, well, and I want to double down on that advice specifically. Talk to experts, not the software provider itself, but the folks that will help you enable the solution once you move forward. And the reality in today's market is that internal accountants will not have the breadth of experiences, and certainly with ERP, but even in the different finance and accounting functional areas. So going with a trusted expert to help you kind of figure out what to look for as you go through that process. Yeah, I think that's like very important, like common sense advice to start with versus, and you probably have seen these stories over the years, Wendy, like I've been in organizations where they say, we are a public company now, so we've outgrown Intact. We must go to Oracle because no one gets fired implementing Oracle, and we're supposed to do it at this age. It's like, what the heck?
You started early with the no one gets fired if, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true anymore. I think the way to not get fired, if that's the way we want to look at it, is again, it's do your research. I mean, what I think of is these trusted partners, right? Of course, they want to win your business as well. However, they're going to have those insights that you, as a financial expert in your organization or past organizations, are not going to have, right? If you talk to multiple system implementers, you're going to find you get a variety of ERPs that they've worked with. They're going to understand, I'm thinking of, I can think of one I won't name, over the years, we've seen that based on their changes that the support quality dropped, right? You're not going to know that if you're talking to them in a sales cycle, right? They're not going to tell you that. So the system implementers are going to give you updated industry information. They can give you comps. They can, talk to you about, hey, have you considered this system, right? I don't know. And you probably know this. We often talk to people and it's like, it must be this system. I know this system. Or again, you don't get fired for this system. I don't think that's true anymore. It's really do your research because every company is so different. You need to find the one that's going to scale for you, solve today's problems, and scale in the future, right? To me, that's success.
Yeah, one thing you also briefly touched on, which I'm an accountant, so I love 2-for-1 deals. By going with a partner, not only are you able to get information about the right solution for you from an expert, but you get to evaluate that partner yourself, whether the
Yes.
synergies and the focus and priorities is there. So you get like a 2-for-1 deal by starting with that first. So I love that, and it makes a lot of sense. Something I've also encountered in terms of like kind of like the critical pieces of an implementation, which I think is not talked about as much, is
Mm.
like culture. Like,
Yes.
and an organization is going through a huge organizational change. Like I've seen culture be an impact. So I wanted to, yeah, toss that question out your way. Like, how would you articulate the importance of that in terms of success for a project?
Yeah, I love that you called that out because organizational culture is so important. Any implementation, right? So an implementation represents a change, right? ERP implementations really affect the entire organization. So, I think from a system implementer point of view, that's one of the first things I try to key in on is what is this client's culture? And it allows us to then adapt to how we work with those teams. So, I think of I've worked with very collaborative companies and where everyone really works together. And so for there, our focus is much more around, hey, how do we just make sure we get the right people in the room, help to push this shared vision forward. Separately, you have siloed cultures. And all the work is, okay, we got to do the change management. We've got to help show people what the value is for sales, for IT, for deal desk, et cetera. And it's funny, at Connor Group, we often say, right, that sometimes the most important thing we do is just getting the right people in the room, having those conversations and creating that vision. So, it's really organizational culture. The importance of it for any implementation is how do they embrace change, right? And if they're resistant and you identify that hurdle early enough, strong leaders, right? And these are the finance leaders who are typically our points of contact. Those strong leaders can still have a successful ERP implementation or any implementation with the right vision for transformation. They can overcome those cultural changes, through communication and great project governance and everything. And so it is possible. Though I would say I definitely prefer when we go to the client and we just see that they are ready to embrace change. They're excited about the future, and it's just you've got that sense of this is one team.
Well, you know what, Wendy, I want to give you and Connor Group a huge shout out. Like, obviously, throughout the years, we in the industry have known Connor Group as the go-to technical accounting firm. Like, you guys know accounting more than anyone. And that's been, obviously the sentiment from the community from very early years. But your answer there was human centric and oriented. And I've had conversations with your colleagues. I mean, that is, I think, a differentiator for you folks as a service provider. Just that awareness, that leadership and culture, and like breaking down silos.
Yeah.
And that's all incredibly important for success. So I want to actually stick to the leadership topic and just laser in on finance specifically. Like, what would you say is a finance leader's role when it comes to an ERP implementation?
Yeah. I think that's really important. I describe it as, when I think of our points of contact, our stakeholders in an engagement, and, they are sometimes the CFOs, chief accounting officer, controller. So these leaders really, I think of it, the role is champion, right? And they need to be involved from start to finish. So system selection, all the way through post go live and that first close. Now, do they need to be hands-on? No, right? That's ideally they have a team, right? They have got a team that they can focus for operational knowledge, the people writing the requirements documents, working on the processes, of course, the functional and technical tasks of hands-on data migration work that goes to the broader team. Senior leaders really need to focus on the cross-functional collaboration, right? I think of an ERP implementation, again, to be successful, really needs to help the entire quote to cash, or these days it's quote to revenue. We say that acronym's always changing, that whole system stack. So how does the ERP fit into that? And so the finance leader really needs to enable that cross-functional collaboration, show people how this ERP is going to help the sales team, the IT team, et cetera. They need to be involved in decision making and change management. Again, with Connor Group, we often help with that as well. It's not a one-person show. And then they need to be involved in the governance. So project governance, making decisions, right? Governance is there to ensure scope creep doesn't happen, et cetera. So really the senior leader needs to be tied in there and be that champion, right? If they're believing in the vision and they can explain that vision and communicate that vision, we have a much better chance of success overall. And again, it's just that champion role is so important and it often makes a difference between success and, it worked. It's live.
I agree 100%. And I know like some of us finance leaders, and I was guilty of this myself in my earlier years, like just having accounting or finance knowledge and knowing where the debits and credits should fall or knowing how certain configurations work is not nearly as important as being that cross-functional champion. And yeah, like you said, like working with sales because their inputs on the CRM side and quote to revenue trickle down into the ERP. Maybe it was different 5 or 10 years ago because CRMs, whatever they did, someone would just re-enter it in an ERP. But in this new integrated environment, that's no longer the case. So there has to be a good awareness of how this big investment that finance is making is helping enable some of these other systems in different areas. So again, like kind of speaks to I think Connor Group is such a leader in this type of space because the awareness that these relationships matter is critical.
And one thing you said, you hope it has changed. It hasn't, right? There's still that, everyone knows the saying garbage in, garbage out, right? And I have this conversation multiple times a week where you're implementing an ERP or changing processes or just upgrading, right? And the problems come upstream are all upstream still today, right? Even with automation. And that's where I think the importance of cleaning your data and one source of truth and how the data flows through systems. It's so important. Again, there's so many other elements of just the financial needs and financial requirements. So no, unfortunately, it's still a problem.
I mean, especially in these days where more data is expected from different cuts of data, that makes the margin for error that much bigger, and like the accuracy of those inputs even more important. So the more data that management like me demands from our business, the more exposure there is to not integrated properly. So I think that's a great call out. And I want to repeat again, like what you mentioned there about just finance leaders and the criticality of the roles being kind of like a bridge maker or bridge builder between these different functions, I think is essential. I want to flip gears here.
Sure.
And I want to get your thoughts. And all of us have horror stories and nightmares, a lot of success stories too, of course. But, I think it is worthwhile for our audience hearing about some of the reasons why certain projects didn't go as planned. So maybe just starting with budget specifically, the ones that go over budget, or maybe they under deliver, like what are the typical causes and how can companies avoid getting into that sort of trouble?
Yeah, I think that's unfortunately it's true, right? That we see a lot of over budget and sometimes over budget and under delivering. It's really common still, right? And I think that we see at Connor Group where we do work with a lot of companies after the fact. So it's a really challenging, it's one of the toughest situations coming in, a company's already paid for an implementation and another company has to come in to clean it up, right? No one wants to do that. No one wants to spend money twice. So if I think of, why do they go over budget, over deadlines, under deliver, I feel like I could give you a dozen answers and they're all going to come down to project planning, right? Like it's poor project planning. Everything comes back to that. And when I think about it, the way you defeat that, right? How do you overcome poor project planning at any stage is really project governance. Right. And so when I think of project governance, and we've done this where we start from the beginning or we come in, right, to turn things around. And you think about, right, project governance, because it's the framework, right? You can catch and correct areas that are under or poorly planned, right? So I think of coming in midstream and, oh, no one's talked about data migration. Data migration is always underestimated. So coming in and you can kind of say, okay, project governance, well, we've got to change things. We've got to deal with this first. Another one I see is resource planning, right? Whether it's the organization themselves or the system implementer, not taking into account that these same teams that need to do the validation, the testing, probably some of the data migration, that they're meeting with auditors, they're closing the books, they have day jobs, right? So even that resource planning and really being really clear, you want to talk about probably the most common over budget scenario is, oh, our team's not available right now. Can you, wait a month, push a month? Okay, yeah, but that always costs money to ramp people up and down. I think project governance is also it's what prevents scope creep, right?
Yeah.
These last minute changes, over customization, because it's that structure, right? And I always think about like that is the structure to make sure that decisions get made timely, that everyone is aligned on the goals, that we know how to deal with these changes. I think you've probably worked with enough system implementers and consultants to say, you've had a team where it's like, oh, can we do this? And the consultant's like, yes, of course. And they, ring up the cash register. It's like, look, that's great. That's a great way to go over budget. But so you've really got to have those controls in place and say, hey, that's fantastic. We can get you a quote for that. And we know who goes and approves it. So it's, it's really, if you are in the position saying, okay, we're going to do an implementation, we're going to select an ERP, go back to what I said at the beginning, spend more time with your system implementer and selecting them than the ERP, right? They're going to help you, and then require them to tell you how they handle not just project management, but project governance. How do they handle change orders? How do they handle all of that? And then, I think the last piece there is just really thinking about, as part of that planning, is create a plan for communication internally in your company. In addition, everyone thinks, oh, it's the customers who are impacted, but it's also the company. So, project governance, get to know your system implementer, understand their processes, and then really have a great communication plan and vision. And then you can prevent all that unnecessary budget overruns.
Oh yeah, I believe that. I believe that 100%. And project governance is an expression that I have not heard about enough throughout the years.
Yeah.
Although, knowing now myself as a software provider, how important that is, because you brought up the point, like with strong project governance, you know who the decision makers are that impact the timing and the scope of the project, right? So if, like you use the example, if a consultant is just saying yes to everything because it's doable, and the governing structure is not aware of what these changes are, and that consultant is not aware of like the framework and the overall milestones, and that's when you go back and say, well, yeah, that customization, like we said, yeah, but it ended up taking us like 200 hours more than expected. With good governance, you get ahead of that and you can consciously decide whether you do it or not, and then of course, live with the impact of it or not.
Mm-hmm.
But it's again, one of those kind of like sensical things that, and I get it. I've been in an ERP project before. There's so many things to do. Right? So,
Yes.
easier said than done. But I'm glad experts like you, right, are able to highlight that for our audience.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of on a similar note, and just to expand a little bit, so we talked about budget and overruns. Like, what are some of the other challenges, like common challenges that you see in ERP implementations, Wendy?
I think probably the biggest one is really thinking, again, hopefully your audience can appreciate this take, being a little too finance centric, which might sound weird, right? But it's really when clients come in and they're really so focused on the ERP is there for our accounting needs, our financial needs, and they're really not, again, I think they're really not thinking of the whole quote to cash or quote to revenue business system landscape. And so what I think about there is, if you're not thinking about, again, and this comes to garbage in, garbage out, right? If you're not thinking about, right, the starting point of an ERP is actually way upstream, It's what's happening in sales. It's how contracts are formed. It's how products are priced and valued, and the discounts. It's all of those decisions that are happening upstream that are going to make your ERP and the functionality of that ERP successful. So it's really and I've seen this scenario where you've got a great, and some leaders consider this a success, a beautiful, shiny new ERP. They have met, under budget. It delivered everything. Fantastic. But they still have bad processes upstream. They still have too many products that the business can't manage it. And they still have these snowflake clients that are, they're so special that it takes their team 20% of their time to deal with them. So to me, that's not a success, right? There's such an opportunity when you're implementing a system as important as an ERP to make those other changes, to take the time, involve those stakeholders, find the common, common areas. Like sales probably doesn't like those one-off contracts either. Deal desk sure doesn't. But take that opportunity to think a little bit more broadly. And that may mean some data cleanup is necessary. That may mean automations and integrations are necessary. But if I think the upside of that is if you collaborate with those teams, you may find as a finance leader, you are able to share budget. Oh, the IT team also wants an iPaaS integration tool. Well, we need it for this ERP. You can also use it for other areas. So there are definitely benefits. And again, I think just having a little bit, opening that mindset a bit and thinking a little bit more broadly, and then also longer term are really the ways to avoid mistakes. And again, I think that's the biggest mistake, is just having almost that too narrow of a vision.
Oh yeah, I've been there before, Wendy, admittedly. So going through kind of an ERP selection process and like putting too much focus on downstream reporting and the capabilities there of an ERP. Same thing with like close management features. Like we accountants get geek out about that. But if that data is not coming in cleanly upstream, like you mentioned, whether it's CRM or even like HR systems as it feeds into payroll journal entries, then you're not going to get everything that you are looking for. And one thing I'll definitely highlight, because this is another level up from that. You mentioned being able to maybe fill other gaps upstream, right? So maybe selecting a new ERP gets you some coverage on something you couldn't do upstream before. And so, I think looking at it holistically and not just and it kind of ties into your response with finance leaders, and not just focusing on finance, like cross-functional. This is like a huge organizational change. Let's get our arms around everything. And
think about it, right? The more buy-in you get, right, the more people you get invested throughout your organization, that you're going to have more success, right? Because now you're championing of this, right? of this implementation. You're now getting additional voices, and so you're kind of getting everyone on that same page. And that's when some of the most, I think, transformative ideas come up in an organization. It's like, oh, everyone's willing to do this change. Let's fix this thing that's driving us all crazy.
And I'll touch on another thing that you mentioned earlier, which is tactically very important as well. You might be able to carve in some budget from those other functional areas. And you and I know, Wendy, that it's harder for us in finance and accounting to get budget approved than someone in sales, right?
Absolutely.
So there's that strategy as well, potentially. And I think the theme here has made itself very clear, like holistic, cross-functional, which I think is, again, like advice not brought up enough. So I'm glad we got you on today to put that spotlight on this important topic. And as we wrap up here, Wendy, just like one piece of advice, if you were to give one to CFO or controller starting an ERP project tomorrow, like what would that be?
Start early. Start the dialogue now. Again, I think it's, I can't stress enough. Start making those contacts with the system implementers. Again, even better, a digital transformation team. Connor Group, we've had, we think about automations and now AI. We've had our automations team that builds these integrations for over, 5 years now, because it's been so critical to successful ERP implementation. So, don't underestimate, I said vendors are trying to sell you. System implementers are also trying to sell you. They're trying to win your business. You can talk to 5 of them, talk to 6 of them. It's about getting that perspective, right? And really leveraging their knowledge and their expertise where you can't be all places at once. You can't know all vendors. So it really comes down to start the dialogue now. If you're thinking it's, several years from now, or just want to understand your current ERP, when will you grow out of that, right? You're going to get help on industry, understanding the entire QTC stack. They can help you understand project management, project governance, and team readiness, right? What is the best time for your team to do this? So again, start the dialogue now. Everyone's going to be willing to talk to you about this, and it's just really leverage the experts' insights.
Well, there you have it. Start early, start the dialogue early, call on experts, and take a holistic cross-functional approach. I think those are great words of wisdom, Wendy. I appreciate you coming on the podcast set to share that. And hopefully we'll get you back on soon. And maybe that topic of AI you touched on is something we could part for next.
Absolutely. It's, continuing to evolve. So what will happen next is anybody's guess. But really enjoyed talking to you and appreciate you having me on the show.
Thanks for joining, Wendy. We'll talk soon.
Thanks for stopping by. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you want more information, please check us out at gapify.com, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.